this isn't what I deserve. I'm 17. I'm going into the world. This isn't the New Zealand that I want to experience.
Do you know what I'd love to see is that guy not only goes and apologises to her in that environment, but goes and meets the whānau. Why not go and see who they are, where they come from, and actually try to understand a little bit more about them? Open your eyes to a different world.
Mm-hmm. Just a bit more on the super, because a big response here. No, says Richard, I oppose it. Our generation will have more debt, fewer assets and less savings than many generations before us. People are already working more and earning less, especially those in physical jobs. It's a false flag for progress, quote unquote. Ross says, yes, isn't this one of the reasons we need to raise the age and work longer so we have enough set aside for when we do retire? And Patrick says, yes, with a caveat. Yes, but only if employers crucially stop age discrimination in their hiring strategies. It's all very well raising the age of retirement, but have you tried applying for a job as a senior? They give the job to a younger, more attractive, energetic person every time, and it's cheaper to do so. I've seen it. Finding a job at 20 is a whole lot easier than finding a new job at 60, and yet the older person should be potentially more employable. So a big response to that. I really appreciate all of what you said there. Now, speaking of dogs, let's test your Pavlovian responses. What do you think when you hear this? Anybody?
Yeah, well, I can immediately feel the cavities forming in my teeth just hearing
yes,
it.
Absolutely.
Do you know, I instinctively feel like going, Mum! I need a couple of dollars, please, quick.
That's exactly it, eh?
It's the hokey pokey hors d'oeuvre truck.
It takes me back to Sunset Drive in the middle of nowhere and seeing that amazing truck come down the road and going, am I going to have it dipped or not dipped?
It's behaviourism, isn't it? Because there was a great short documentary on the BBC looking at the phenomenon of ice cream music and the feeling it elicits. And here's the deal. Way back 100 or so years ago when it first started, you know, it was always associated with the street seller, the vendor, so they do a chime or some sort of rhyme or something like that. So it's kind of like pokies in a sense.
Absolutely.
You hear the bells.
What's with green sleeves? We never had green sleeves in America. I mean, what is it? Robin Hood likes hokey pokey. You know, Little John would be like cup and cone. What's your preference?
Do you have
Robbie?
ice cream trucks in America?
Absolutely, but we don't have green sleeves.
What do they do?
Well, I thought, in one of your articles, it said something about The Entertainer was, that song from The Sting. That was the most popular ice cream song. But this is, it just wants to put you to sleep. What are you guys thinking?
Mr. Whippy takes me back to being 6, 7 years old and just, the afternoon getting back from school, dumping the bag, and then Mr. Whippy's coming down the road and me and my brothers fighting over who's going to get what. And honestly, literally hearing that took me back to my happy place as a youngster. And I felt like doing it going, Mom!
You have that happy place look. Wallace, do you let your little guy have ice cream yet?
He doesn't. Do you know what he likes? He hates sweet. Do you know what little boy likes?
What?
Kimchi.
Oh, my God.
22-month-old kimchi.
We all thought that Wallace Chapman was a nice guy. We know that he's a serial killer on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and now he feeds his child kimchi instead of ice cream.
Tracy Barnett and Scott Campbell, thank you very much for being with us. Wonderful panel. See you tomorrow, 3:45.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, the former minister, the money and the Chinese billionaire. Anything or nothing to see here. Controversy over political donations fuels calls for a complete ban on foreign cash. Convicted double killer Mark Lundy is back in court challenging his convictions. Sacked Cabinet Minister Claire Curran pulls the pin on politics altogether. A jury hears a Northland toddler died of a catastrophic head injury. Māori suicide prevention workers say they are undervalued and underfunded. The drug maker ordered to pay billions for its part in fueling opioid addiction in the US. And in baby news, could that be the sound of thundering white rhino hooves? RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Justice Minister Andrew Little says there is a risk of this country falling prey to foreign influence via party donations. National received a donation in 2016 of $150,000 from a New Zealand company owned by Chinese billionaire Lang Ling, but the party says it was above board. Electoral law does not allow foreign donations above $1,500, but companies registered in New Zealand are considered local, even if foreign-owned. Mr Little says there is a problem with how foreign donations can be concealed.
Our company's regime makes it easy for donations to be channeled through that sort of process, and I think that's something, we have to be alert to, and we have to think carefully about whether, we have a regime that is tight enough to control that.
Andrew Little says he has asked the Justice Select Committee to look into foreign donations as part of their election review. The Greens are disappointed the government isn't going further in changing the way MPs' pay increases are calculated. Last year, Parliament froze MPs' pay after rejecting a proposed 3% pay rise as unacceptably high. Today, the government announced it's scrapping the set formula introduced under National in 2015 and restoring the Remuneration Authority's independence in setting pay rises. Greens co-leader Marama Davidson says while this is a good step, the government should be doing more than just returning to the way things were before 2015. She says MPs' pay should be linked to the average annual wage increases of New Zealanders.
It's not good enough for MP salaries to get further and further away from what the rest of the country and our citizens are earning, and so we're going to be really loud about that.
Marama Davidson. The Crown lawyer in the Mark Lundy appeal has told the court the prosecution case didn't rely on a piece of evidence that was later ruled inadmissible. Mark Lundy's appeal against his convictions for murdering his wife and daughter 19 years ago has wrapped up its first day in the Supreme Court. Lundy's lawyer has argued that the use of mRNA evidence was crucial in convincing the jury that Lundy's shirt had his wife's brain tissue on it. However, Crown lawyer Philip Morgan QC told the court the case was rock solid even after the mRNA was ruled out.
The bulk of the Crown closing address, certainly in the first part, is all about the CNS and the DNA. And there's a small passage on mRNA about a third of the way through it. That was the significance it ultimately had in the end. Barely touched on it.
Philip Morgan. Lundy's defence team respond to Mr Morgan's submissions when the appeal resumes tomorrow. Cases of meningococcal disease are up 40% from this time last year, including high numbers of the previously rare W strain. From January until July, there were 78 cases of meningococcal disease nationally, up from 55 cases at the same time last year. Among them was a young child who recently died from meningitis in the mid-central DHB area. Mid-Central Officer of Health, Jeff Brown, says the disease can look like other winter bugs, but meningococcal W is even harder to spot.
The worrying thing for paediatricians and those looking after children is that it seems the W strain has more widespread presentation. So it masquerades as more other winter ills. And in addition, it seems that the cases of meningococcal W are more serious.
Jeff Brown says it's important parents never hesitate to return to a clinic if a child's condition deteriorates. White supremacist Philip Arp's appeal against his prison sentence has been dismissed. In June, the 44-year-old was jailed for 21 months for distributing the video of the March 15th mosque attacks. Alicia Foon has more.
In the High Court, Judge Justice Rachel Dunningham dismissed the appeal. Arps shared the Christchurch mosque attack video with a group of 30 friends or associates after the shooting had occurred. He also had a version of the video modified to have crosshairs and a kill count added, which the judge found to glorify the killings. Arps has previously compared himself to Adolf Hitler's deputy, Rudolf Hess. It comes after the Crown accused Arps of sending letters of a violent nature from prison. Ko Elisha Fern tēnei.
US President Donald Trump says he is open to meeting Iran's President Hassan Rouhani under the right circumstances. It comes after Iran's foreign minister made a brief and unannounced visit to the G7 summit in France at the weekend. Relations between Iran and the US have deteriorated since Washington withdrew last year from a 2015 deal to limit Iran's nuclear activities. However, Mr. Trump said overnight he had good feelings about the prospect of a new nuclear deal with Iran. It's 5:05. Serena Williams has trounced longtime rival Maria Sharapova in straight sets in their first round match at the US Tennis Open, getting her quest for a record-tying 24th Grand Slam title off to a flying start. Williams overwhelmed Sharapova 6-1, 6-1 in the first US Open meeting between two of the sport's biggest names. Five-time men's champion Roger Federer was made to look the novice early in his opening match rather than his opponent India's Sumit Nagal, who was making his first Grand Slam appearance. Nagal, who's ranked 190th in the world, took the first set 6-4, but Federer bounced back to take the next three 6-1, 6-2, 6-4. The All Blacks centre Ryan Crotty will make a much-anticipated return to rugby this weekend. 9 weeks ago, Crotty fractured his thumb in the Super Rugby semi-final against the Hurricanes, but will return for Canterbury's in this weekend's match against Southland. His return is also likely to cement his place in the All Blacks World Cup squad, which is named tomorrow. The New Zealand cricket captain, Kane Williamson, says it would have been nice to have played a 3-test series against Sri Lanka to find a series winner. The 2-test series was drawn, with the Black Caps winning Game 2 by an innings and 65 runs in Colombo overnight. The majority of New Zealand's test series in recent years have involved just 2 games, and Williamson says a decider would have been nice.
When both sides are playing well and it's 1-1, it's naturally a nice thing to consider, but I suppose we always knew it was 2 coming into it.
The two sides now play a 3-game T20 series. That's the news.
Curbing violence.
I'm desperate. This is my community. I think there's massive potential here, and we'll lose that potential if they turn to the gangs and they turn to that life.
Clearing the smokescreen.
So we've got to be very careful, because we could be growing a new generation of addicted people to a product that's going to harm them, not as much as smoking, but it's going to harm them.
Controlling the weather.
He suggested that a nuclear bomb could be used on the storm. Nobody actually knows what goes on in Donald Trump's head.
Exploring life's mysteries. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, the impact on healthy siblings when their brother or sister is diagnosed with a serious illness. And after 10, US writer Colson Whitehead on the Florida Reform School, which was a chamber of horrors. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Meet Service to midnight tomorrow. Northern and western areas from Northland to Taranaki and Taihape, including Bay of Plenty. Long fine spells and a few showers. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, isolated showers tonight, fine tomorrow. Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua and Kapiti, mostly fine tonight. Cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. For Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine in most places, but showers and norwesterly gales on Stewart Island. Bulla and Westland, fine spells, isolated showers tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow and showers becoming more extensive. Fiordland, showers turning to rain tomorrow evening. And Chatham Islands, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A $150,000 donation to the National Party has raised fresh questions about foreign influence and who should be allowed to give money to political parties. National received the money in 2016 from a New Zealand company owned by the Chinese billionaire Lang Lin. The Prime Minister says the donation goes against the spirit of the law, but the opposition insists it was completely legal. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever with the details.
Todd McLeay says he met Mr Lang in July 2016, while he was in China acting as Trade Minister. He maintains ministry officials were with him at both meetings and there was no talk of a political donation. A year later, Mr McLeay invited Lang Lin to Rotorua.
He did raise that he would like to support the National Party. At that time I asked a colleague to liaise with the New Zealand company around that, and between that meeting and the election didn't meet with the person that donated to the National Party again.
Mr Macleay says at the time he was there as a National MP, not as a minister or the MP for Rotorua. He says he does not believe Mr Lang is a New Zealand resident or citizen, but the $150,000 donation was entirely above board.
The company that he is involved in New Zealand is a New Zealand company, and look, the donation is fully within the law in New Zealand. The donation was fully declared by the National Party.
Electoral law does not allow foreign donations above $1,500, but companies registered in New Zealand are considered local, even if they're foreign-owned. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the donation is not in the spirit of the law.
We have a law in place that's meant to prevent that, and yet we've got an example here of where something lawful might have happened, but it's outside the spirit of what we're trying to achieve.
And Justice Minister Andrew Little is worried there's a risk of New Zealand falling prey to foreign influence through political donations.
I think that the parties, particularly the two major parties, work very hard to ensure that doesn't happen. But the reality is, if you can funnel large sums of money through what look like New Zealand originating companies, then clearly it is a risk.
Andrew Little says it's a problem he's raised with the Justice Select Committee. The committee is currently holding an inquiry into the 2017 election, putting the country's donation laws under the microscope. National MP Nick Smith is part of the committee and says the current laws around foreign donations are inadequate, but making changes won't be straightforward.
Certainly my view is that we need to tighten the rules. The issue is if you are going to ban any foreign company from being able to contribute, there are a large number of significant commercial players in New Zealand that are overseas owned, of which you need to have a finessed approach to make sure it works for New Zealand. So if you take a company like Fletcher's or our major banks or Spark, they can properly contribute to democracy.
Labour MP Greg O'Connor is also on the committee, and he says today's revelations won't sit well with people.
I think not only from a select committee point of view, but every New Zealander, I think will just be a little bit uncomfortable, if not more, knowing what's been exposed today.
No release date for the committee's report has been given, but Mr O'Connor was confident the Select Committee is nearing the end of the inquiry. However, this leaves little time for political parties to make changes ahead of the 2020 election. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Interested to know what you think of that. Do you think this donation was outside the spirit of the law, as the Prime Minister says? Should we ban foreign political donations altogether, or is the system fit for purpose as it is? You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Māori suicide prevention workers say they are undervalued and underfunded, and they're pleading for more support as Māori suicide rates reach record highs. New figures show 685 people in Aotearoa killed themselves in the past year to June, and that includes the highest number of Māori suicide deaths ever at 169. Our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
Families around the country are grappling with the devastating reality of the worst suicide statistics since records began. In the river city of Whanganui, Kiritahi Furman says 2 dads, including a father of 5, have taken their own lives here in the past fortnight alone. The head of Kimiora Trust Suicide Prevention, Mrs Furman, says the situation is tragic.
For Māori people in Pasifika, the stats have risen. For Pākehā, they have declined. Now, there must be some sort of secret to their source, because for us, we're in dire straits. This is sad. This is actually more than sad. This is a travesty.
Mrs Furman says a key problem is that DHBs and health organisations are working in silos, and Māori approaches to suicide prevention are treated as second best to Western ones.
We're not funded enough, and if we're not funded enough, how can we be valued enough, you know? The DHBs and the Ministry of Health will fund non-Māori models just like that. because they're clinical.
Stormy Rogan works for Kia Piki Te Ora Suicide Prevention and says her heart sank when she heard that Māori suicide rates had risen yet again. She says they're working closely with the DHB, but whānau are struggling out there and everyone needs to step up.
You know, there's never enough funding, especially for this kaupapa. There's not enough staff, not enough counsellors, there's waiting lists. There's just not enough people to talk with our people, so I think that our whānau need to champion ourselves. We need to check in on each other and talk to each other and make it comfortable that they can talk to each other.
But it's not just adults who are struggling to cope. The number of young people aged 15 to 19 who have committed suicide has gone from 20 to a staggering 73. A lead mentor at the YMCA, Justin Gush, is trying to involve rangatahi in basketball and Māori traditions to make them feel better about themselves.
With all the good mahi we can do out there, there's a lot of issues going on within our whānau that we see probably on a daily basis, and we're more in a mentoring role, supporting our rangatahi daily, trying to find their way in this life. But yeah, there's so many things going on at home.
Ngā Kouroa Love, who's 16 years old, says she's battled suicidal thoughts before and says there's a complete lack of support for rangatahi.
There's just no one there for you to talk to and try and put the message through, so, you know, our rangatahi find ways to handle their own, and that's like suicide, for example, you know? Like, it's not fair, man. It's not fair on our children.
Miss Love says social media and bullying are added pressures and young people just want to feel loved and validated. Another young woman who we cannot name says growing up in child welfare made her suicidal too, but adults can be dismissive.
People can be horrible and just tell you, you know, shut up, you're being stupid, like, you know, stop it. Hard out. But really, when they say that, they don't actually know what's going on in your mind, like, or in your heart, your body, your soul, like, you need to get up and do something about that and support your children, because otherwise you're going to see them leave before you do, and that's not right.
Mr Gush says the absence of a national suicide prevention strategy since 2016 has clearly had a devastating impact on Māori. The government has responded to the statistics by allocating $40 million towards suicide prevention and says it will release a new strategy soon. For Checkpoint, ko li Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
The former Cabinet Minister Claire Curran, who was sacked from Cabinet a year ago, is to quit Parliament at the next election. She has been Labour's MP for Dunedin South since 2008. Ms Curran resigned as Broadcasting and ACC Minister after 2 failures to disclose 2 meetings. While her ministerial career was short-lived, some constituents say they're sad to see her go as their electorate MP. Here's our political reporter Jo Moyer.
Claire Curran's downward spiral began in August last year, when the Prime Minister demoted her from Cabinet and stripped her of her digital services and open government portfolios. She had failed to disclose 2 meetings, one with RNZ's then Head of News Carol Hirschfeld and the other with tech entrepreneur Derek Hanley. That was the beginning of the end for Ms Curran, who just weeks later was left humiliated when she visibly and verbally battled her way through question time, under pressure from the opposition over her use of personal email for government business.
To the best of my recollection, I haven't used my. I've answered OIA responses and personal and parliamentary questions correctly, and to the best of my recollection, that's what I've done.
That display saw her go on personal leave, and the following day she resigned from her 2 remaining ministerial posts. She said it had all become too much.
I am, like the rest of you, a human being, and I can no longer endure the relentless pressure that I've been under. I've made some mistakes. They weren't deliberate undermining of the political system. But my mistakes have been greatly amplified, and the pressure on me has become intolerable.
While Ms Curran stayed on as an electorate MP, today she announced that she will put a close on a 12-year parliamentary career at next year's election. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Ms Curran was genuine and passionate about the work she did on public broadcasting and technology issues. She denied pressuring Ms Curran, but also didn't encourage her to stay.
Ultimately, she came to me with a decision, so it wasn't a matter for negotiation. She just came to me with a decision. This has been on her terms, and I respect that.
Residents in Dunedin South are sad to see the MP step down, despite her highly publicised downfall.
I think it's kind of sad news. I think it's sad for Claire, and I think it's sad for Dunedin South Dunedin in some ways. I think she thinks strongly about South Dunedin.
Well, as long as they've got someone to, fill her spot that's, of sort of her quality, I suppose it's just the way things go. Yeah, it's just a shame things ended up the way they were.
She's worked well. She's represented the South Dunedin constituency well, but that's her choice. So 12 years is a good innings.
I actually really like Claire as an MP, and she seems to be the go-to person for a lot of people around here. So that will be quite sad for people that struggle with everyday events and would like to know that she was there for them.
So you think she's been a champion for the people around this area?
She has.
Her Labour Party colleagues also spoke kindly of her time in Parliament. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says his friend decided for herself that it was time to go.
Claire's made that decision on her own. She's a good friend of mine and someone who I'm really going to miss from around this place after next year. She's made some really important contributions to us as a party and certainly to her people she represents in South Dunedin.
Mr Robertson says Ms Curran is a fearless advocate for her constituents and expects she will continue to be. Ms Curran declined to be interviewed by RNZ. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
And it's 21 after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A neuropathologist has told a jury a Northland toddler died of a catastrophic head injury, so severe the young girl could never have survived it. 2-year-old Aria Roberts died in her home at Mangawhai Heads last August. She'd been left in the care of her mother's former boyfriend, Aaron Archer, who is now on trial in the High Court at Auckland, accused of murdering her. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, filed this story.
It's the Crown's case that Mr Archer assaulted Aria in the 15 minutes he was alone with her. This morning, neuropathologist Professor Colin Smith gave evidence via AVL from Scotland. He told the jury Aria's cause of death was a blunt force head injury.
In this case, you could have the best neurosurgeons standing, waiting to go. The outcome would have been the exact same. This is a devastating head injury.
He said fatal accidental head injuries in children were exceptionally rare.
The vast majority of children, when they fall, have a mild head injury. I have never seen a fatal outcome in a 2-year-old, which is so immediately catastrophic.
Various first responders have told the court they overheard Mr Archer say he was swinging the girl around when she hit her head. But last week, ESR forensic scientist Fiona Matheson, who examined the house, said she didn't find any unusual dents or marks in the house.
Nothing stood out as immediately interesting to sort of go, okay, there may have been an impact here, or there may have been a punch here, or even an extended contact. The walls appeared evenly dirty. There was no indication of cleaning. There was just nothing that just sort of stood out as being unexpected or unusual.
The court has heard Aria had bruising on her body and both sides of her head, indicating more than one impact. Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey asked Mr Smith if he'd ever seen a brain injury of such severity from a playground situation.
I have never seen a fatal outcome in a child from that type of scenario. Children, toddlers fall over all the time and they bump their heads all the time. These children don't die.
Under cross-examination, Mr Smith told Mr Archer's defence lawyer Annabelle Maxwell-Scott a child hitting their head while being swung around was still a possible scenario.
I've seen other cases, albeit in younger children, where that has happened. So I have seen cases with that scenario causing this catastrophic type of injury.
The Crown is expected to call Aria's mother and the forensic pathologist who completed the girl's post-mortem tomorrow. Atu i te ko ti matua ko Annika Smith aho.
A Wellington apartment owner facing skyrocketing insurance premiums is demanding the government take over the natural disaster insurance industry. Wellington City Council this week hosted the first of 3 meetings to give feedback to the government about the effect of the price hikes and what effect they're having on the cities. But while talks are going on, a downtown apartment owner says people like her are being bled dry. Hamish Cardwell has more.
It's a city hit by earthquakes, landslides and flooding, and now owners are being hit by ever-increasing insurance premiums. Wellington's Chamber of Commerce says premiums for a typical commercial office block have jumped 220% in 4 years, from $99,000 to almost $320,000. Chrissy Hill owns a CBD apartment and says her natural disaster cover has gone up 57% on last year.
The Wellington City Council were wanting to invigorate the inner city, and they're giving all the consents to all the big apartments, and they're talking about Wellington being the greatest little city and everyone's happy and safe in the inner city, and it's a good buzz.
But she says that investment could turn sour, and the local economy will suffer too if too many owners are forced to keep paying massive premiums to large multinationals offshore.
People just won't be able to afford to live in these apartments in a city. We would probably go out to dinner less, or we would go to the cafes less. We would go to Circa less, for instance. So there's that flow-on effect.
Wendy Booth represents body corporates on the insurance task force. She says she's happy local and central government have finally taken an interest in the issues facing downtown residents and property owners. But she says the government must intervene to get more competition into the industry.
Because we don't think there's enough competition in the market. There are 4 major players that have got 85% of the New Zealand market. So we don't have a lot of options in terms of who we go to for insurance.
Chrissy Hill says the government needs to go even further and have its insurer, the Earthquake Commission, take over the natural disaster insurance industry. Wellington's Mayor Justin Lester, who chairs the task force, says there are calls for the government to reassure homeowners nationwide.
Strong comments in our meeting was that this is a public good. There needs to be certainty for the public, not just for safety, but because we want to have broad insurance cover around the country. And so that's one consideration for government.
The next task force meetings are in September and October, with its recommendations to go to the government after that. For Checkpoint, iti whanganui atara, ko Hamish Cardwell tēnei.
If you live in Wellington, let us know what's happening with your premiums and whether you think the government needs to step in. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You could also send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. To the US now, where a judge has ruled that drug maker Johnson & Johnson must pay more than $500 million in damages for its part in fueling the opioid addiction crisis in Oklahoma. The company was accused of carrying out a cynical and deceitful marketing campaign promoting the benefits of opioids while minimising the risks. Around 6,000 people have died from opioid overdoses in Oklahoma in recent years, and hundreds of thousands have died across the US. The case was the first to go to trial out of thousands of lawsuits filed against the opioid makers and distributors, and it set a monumentous legal precedent. The BBC's Aleem Makbul reports.
This is a hugely significant verdict in the first case of its kind in the US. It relates to the opioid drug crisis that so far claimed a staggering 500,000 lives in this country since the late 90s. Currently, around 130 Americans are dying of opioid overdoses every single day. Many of those deaths are related to prescription opioid painkillers. Oklahoma prosecuted 3 pharmaceutical companies that produced these drugs, though 2 agreed on financial settlements before the trial began. Johnson & Johnson went to court and argued that because these medicines were legal and licensed by the US government, it had done nothing wrong. The judge disagreed, saying the company had launched an aggressive misinformation campaign, wildly underplaying the huge risks of addiction and overdose with these drugs, ordering the company to pay $572 million to the state. Oklahoma's Attorney General Mike Hunter, who brought the case, talked of his satisfaction at the decision.
Johnson & Johnson will finally be held accountable for thousands of deaths and addiction caused by their activities. We have proven that Johnson & Johnson built its billion-dollar brand out of greed and on the backs of pain and suffering of innocent people.
But Sabrina Strong, an attorney for Johnson & Johnson, said the company would be appealing the verdict.
We have sympathy for all who suffer from substance abuse. But Johnson & Johnson did not cause the opioid abuse crisis here in Oklahoma or anywhere in this country.
After the court's decision was made, the value of Johnson & Johnson shares actually rose, presumably because Oklahoma was seeking damages in the billions, not just in the hundreds of millions it got. Nevertheless, the verdict has potentially helped the cases of more than 40 other states in the process of prosecuting drug companies involved in producing opioids in a massive federal class action that starts later this year, and could even help open the door for individuals who want to fight for compensation for the damage done to their lives by these highly addictive and powerful drugs.
Ali Makbul with that report. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, New Zealand votes against giving new international trade protections to endangered mako sharks at a World Wildlife Conference, and a collection of taonga left on board Captain Cook's ship, the Endeavour, will be returned on loan after 250 years. We'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program today. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says this country is at risk of falling prey to foreign influence via party donations. National received a donation of $150,000 from a New Zealand company owned by a Chinese billionaire, but insists it's above board. Electoral law does not allow foreign donations above $1,500, but companies registered in New Zealand are considered local, even if foreign owned. Mr Little says there is a problem with how foreign donations can be concealed. The former Cabinet Minister Claire Curran, who stepped down as a minister amid controversy last year, is about to quit Parliament altogether at the next election. Ms Curran resigned as Broadcasting Minister after 2 failures to disclose meetings. She's been MP for Dunedin South since 2008. Māori suicide prevention workers are calling for more support to help stem the alarming rise of Māori suicide rates. New figures show Māori suicide has reached a record high, with a jump from 142 deaths to 169 per year, and the figures include a sharp rise in teenage suicide. A Wellington body corporate representative wants the government to intervene in the insurance industry to stop premiums skyrocketing. Wellington's mayor's been gathering feedback about the effects of disaster insurance price hikes on the city. Wendy Booth, who represents body corporates, says there's not enough competition in the market. The Crown lawyer in the Mark Lundy appeal says the prosecution case didn't rely on a piece of evidence that was later ruled inadmissible. Mark Lundy's appeal against his convictions for murdering his wife and daughter 19 years ago has ended its first day in the Supreme Court. Debate has centred on the use of evidence used to convince the jury that Lundy's shirt had his wife's brain tissue on it. US President Donald Trump says he is open to meeting Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. It comes after Iran's foreign minister turned up at the G7 summit in France. The US and Iran have been at odds over Iran's nuclear activities, but Mr Trump now says he feels good about the prospect of a new nuclear deal. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time for business now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Tourism Holdings, drop in profits. What's gone wrong?
Well, it's really had a very strong business in New Zealand and Australia, and their tourism business here is also doing well, but not in the United States. In the United States, their sales of rental vans and so on down about 30%. a third of quite a big drop. And they're a little bit concerned about that. So they're reviewing their operations in the United States to see what they could do better and have promised to turn that around. But, overall, even though their profit was down 52%, that was in line with expectations. And so the market wasn't that upset about it. So they reported a net profit of just under $30 million. And as a result of that, believe it or not, their share price rose more than 5%.
Are they saying anything about why they think there's been that drop-off in the States?
I don't think they really know. And I think that there's a lot of question marks about the U.S. economy and its performance. There's a lot of question marks about where it's going. And it's hard to plan because so much is happening there in terms of trade talks and so forth. The manufacturing sector there has been hit quite hard. So there's a lot of question marks about the performance, where that economy is going. I was speaking with an economist, the chief global economist for S&P. It's a ratings agency. And he said that the recession risk for the U.S. has risen to 35%, and that's twice what it was a year ago.
NZME, so this is the media company, also downward trend with their profit. The numbers?
Well, less than $1 million net profit. Now, partly that was a result of an accounting change. So if you took that out of it, they made about $4.5 million around about. Look, it's not a very good result in terms of their income versus their net profit. So their income revenue stream was about $181 million. But it's hard to see where the growth is going to come from. They're working really hard, investing in their digital platform. They have a premium paywall now, so if you want to look at their premium content. They're very pleased that they have 15,000 digital subscribers. In addition to the subscribers who were newspaper subscribers have also signed on, so they've got 40,000 all up. They're counting on their One Roof platform to make their money.
So this is the real estate.
Yes, because I think that there's a potential there because really the biggest game in town is Trade Me. I guess the realestate.co.nz might wonder about whether that's the case. But in any case, NZME is really investing quite a lot in their One Roof product. It's a difficult situation. There were rumors swirling about what's going to happen with the industry overall. Stuff is on the market. It's for sale. Would NZME buy it? Well, they tried to merge once before and that didn't succeed. Have conditions changed? We'll see. And in case their share price fell nearly 7% on that result.
And what other things have been happening on the market
today, the market has settled down. So yesterday we said, what could happen?
Yep.
Guess what happened? Donald Trump sort of stepped back and said, oh, no, I think we can make a deal. So guess what? The market said, oh, good. Now we can relax a little bit. And as a result, it recovered, lo and behold. Anyways, the NZX 50 index, it rose nearly 1/3%. So that's 30 points up to 10,514. And the dollar is fairly steady, 63.7 US cents, 94.2 Australian and 52.1 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Pelsier with our business news this evening. Mark Lundy's last-ditch appeal against his convictions for murdering his wife and daughter 19 years ago has wrapped up its first day in the Supreme Court. Lundy was convicted in 2002 of the murder of Christine and Amber Lundy in their Palmerston North home in August 2000, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, he has always maintained his innocence, and an appeal to the Privy Council saw his conviction quashed in 2013 and a retrial ordered. At the 2015 retrial, he was again found guilty and his life sentence reinstated. And he lost a subsequent appeal last year. But the Supreme Court will now decide whether that retrial gave him a fair go. Emma Hatton reports.
Mark Lundy's lawyer, Jonathan Eaton QC, says Lundy is the victim of junk science, and the Supreme Court has agreed to hear an appeal based narrowly on one argument, known as the proviso. The Court of Appeal has found some of the scientific evidence used at the second trial was inadmissible, but ultimately ruled there was no substantial miscarriage of justice. The prosecution had asked the jury to look at 3 pieces of evidence found on Lundy's shirt: DNA, central nervous system tissue, or CNS, and mRNA. The Crown argued that these 3 pieces of evidence proved that the tissue on his shirt was from his wife's brain, but Mr Eaton says the mRNA, which was ruled out, was a cornerstone of the Crown's argument.
And that's a key issue on this trial because the Crown approach, clearly marked by the history, is that the CNS plus the DNA did not get them over the line.
Despite the mRNA being ruled out, the judges applied the proviso, meaning the other pieces of evidence were enough to prove guilt. But Mr Eaton argued that without the mRNA evidence, it's unclear what the jury would have decided at the retrial. He also told the court a lengthy pre-trial hearing on whether the mRNA evidence was to be admitted made the retrial unfair because it soaked up a lot of the defence's time. And Mr Eaton told the court greater care should have been taken in applying the proviso because the Crown's case had changed significantly between the first and second trial, and key facts had always been disputed, such as the time the murders took place.
When you change your theory so significantly and so many years, 14 years after the event, then that causes significant prejudice, significant unfairness to a defendant.
However, the Crown's lawyer, Philip Morgan QC, told the court the case's history was irrelevant and that the Crown's case hadn't hinged on the admissibility of the mRNA evidence.
The bulk of the Crown closing address, certainly in the first part, is all about the CNS and the DNA. And there's a small passage on mRNA about a third of the way through it. That was the significance it ultimately had in the end. Barely touched on it.
He said it would have been an extraordinary coincidence that Lundy could have ended up with CNS tissue and Christine Lundy's DNA, which was consistent with blood or tissue on his shirt, if he had not killed her. Mr Eaton will have a chance to respond to Mr Morgan's submissions when the appeal resumes tomorrow. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
The government is scrapping changes brought in 2015 to try and stop excessive pay increases for MPs, labelling the changes a failure that have had the opposite effect. Last year, Parliament froze MPs' salaries and allowances after rejecting the proposed 3% pay increase as unacceptably high. In 2015, concerned by high salary increases, former Prime Minister John Key removed the Remuneration Authority's independence in setting MPs' pay and instead introduced a set formula. But Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says the change led to even greater pay increases and he's going to introduce a bill to repeal it. But the Greens are warning this is simply tinkering around the edges and MPs' wages should match other New Zealanders. So do MPs think they're paid too much?
It's around $295,000 a year. I work incredibly hard and I hope that people do consider the work that I do good value for money. That ultimately is a decision for them to make at each election.
I do earn a substantial amount. I absolutely accept that. I wasn't comfortable with the level of increases that I was seeing relative to what was being experienced by the public. I felt it was out of kilt and I think other MPs agree.
It's not good enough for MP salaries to get further and further away from what the rest of the country and our citizens are earning.
I find that a really hard question to answer. We're well paid, but MPs work hard as well, and so I'm sure a lot of New Zealanders will, have their own views about that.
I'm being paid a little bit less than I was before, but if you come here for the money, you're in the wrong place.
MPs' pay increases should be tied to increases in the general economy. If you did that, there'd be some fairness in it, and you might even get a few MPs focused on improving economic policy. Who knows?
I think everyone's going to have their own view on it. All I'll say is that we're very well paid for what we do.
And that's MPs and some Cabinet Ministers and the Prime Minister giving their views on whether their pay is fair. A bill to repeal the 2015 rule will be introduced to Parliament tomorrow. Keen to hear what you think about that. Are they paid about right, too much or not enough? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on that. As thousands of fires continue to rage through the Amazon rainforest, the world's wealthiest nations are taking action. At the G7 summit, the French President Emmanuel Macron pushed the issue and announced that $22 million will be released in emergency aid to help affected countries battle the blazes. But Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro hasn't taken kindly to the offer. Here's the CBC's Alan Morrow.
It sounds like a rainforest should. Birds and insects chirping as if nothing's changed. But on the ground, the lush greenery is gone. There's only the charred remains of the part of the Amazon that once stood here. The loss is becoming unbearable. Rayoni Muktaktire is an indigenous chief. The Amazon is turning into ashes, he says. We can't continue like this. As thousands of fires continue to burn, today the world showed it's at least listening.
L'Amazonie emmagasine 14% du CO2 mondial.
The host of the G7, French President Emmanuel Macron, announced some $25 million to fight the fires, saying the Amazon rainforest is irreplaceable.
Alongside other G7 countries, Canada is stepping up.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced an additional $15 million from Canada.
And our government has been in touch with the Brazilian government to offer our support and to put an end to this crisis.
O que está de olho da Amazônia? O que eles querem lá?
But Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro did not readily welcome the G7 aid, accusing host France of a colonial mentality, asking, do you think someone helps without something in return? What do they want in the Amazon? Protests have broken out at Brazilian embassies around the world. Critics blame far-right Bolsonaro, his anti-environmental rhetoric, and lack of action on deforestation for the scope of the fires. We all need to stop this protester says. The consequences won't just be for Brazil, but for the whole planet. But there are questions, too, about whether the rest of the world is doing enough. Greenpeace called the money pledged by the G7 chump change. And there's criticism for President Trump, who did not attend the meeting where the funding was discussed. Still, Michael Flanagan, a professor of wildland fire at the University of Alberta, says any help is vital.
It will help greatly, especially if what we send are some of our firefighters and crews that are experienced and can help out that way. We got to put these fires out. But longer term, what can we do so that this doesn't happen year after year after year?
A question that becomes ever more pressing. Each day, the fires burn.
Alan Morrow with that report. New Zealand has voted against giving new international trade protections to endangered mako sharks at a World Wildlife Conference. Wildlife experts from around the world are at the conference for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species in Geneva, where protections on species ranging from butterflies to giraffes and sharks are being considered. Now, a proposal to better protect mako sharks was passed by more than 100 delegates. But New Zealand was among 40 countries opposing it. Amy Williams reports.
Shark fin soup is a delicacy in East Asia, where demand for the dish drives the global trade in mako sharks. Those against international protections for the sharks, including New Zealand's Department of Conservation, argue there's not enough evidence to show these creatures of the deep sea are disappearing as a result of fishing. The proposal does not ban fishing, but requires any catch for export to be sustainable. Greenpeace New Zealand Executive Director Russell Norman says it's important to protect mako sharks.
The New Zealand position is very difficult to understand why New Zealand would oppose something like this, which protects species that are highly at risk. Shark numbers have plummeted globally as a result of the commercial fishing industry. They get caught up in nets and on long lines, and their numbers have absolutely plummeted. So every protection possible should be given to them.
Mako sharks are the fastest sharks in the ocean, and although they are not a protected species in New Zealand, there is a fishing quota for their catch, and it is illegal to remove the fins from a shark and discard the body at sea. Dr. Norman says he can only speculate about the reason for New Zealand's vote against protecting these sharks.
Given that it was the Ministry of Primary Industries that had the delegation at the meeting, that they have a perspective from the fishing industry rather than a broader perspective of protecting sharks and protecting the environment. And the fishing industry know that they're killing these sharks in large numbers, so they don't want any protections put on them.
The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES for short, is an international agreement that regulates and monitors trade in wildlife. 102 countries voted in favour of the proposal to protect mako sharks, and this is due to be ratified later this week. Save Sea Foundation aims to protect the ocean, and its director, Georgine Bradley, is at CITES in Geneva. She says this year there's been an increase in the number of requests to protect species.
There are so many animals that are endangered or vulnerable or just in harm's way that we are unable to keep up with the flow. And that is particularly concerning. So what are we going to do?
While New Zealand voted against protecting short fin markhor sharks, it voted for protecting rays in the wedgefish and guitarfish families. New Zealand is represented by experts from the Department of Conservation and the Ministry for Primary Industries. In a statement, DOC International Partnerships Manager Sam Thomas says they consulted a panel of experts to form its position on the protections of markhor sharks. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is almost 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're getting a lot of feedback on political donations and whether donations from foreigners should be banned altogether. Don't forget you can get in touch by texting us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. I'm aiming to get some of that feedback before 6 o'clock. To the US now, and Donald Trump says he is open to meeting Iran's President Hassan Rouhani under the right circumstances. It comes after Iran's foreign minister made a brief and unannounced visit to the G7 summit in France. Relations between Iran and the US have deteriorated since Washington withdrew last year from a 2015 deal to limit Iran's nuclear activities. But now, Donald Trump says he has a good feeling about the possibility of a new deal with Iran. The BBC's James Lansdale reports.
For days now, France has been trying to find a diplomatic way of de-escalating tensions between Iran and the West. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif even turned up unexpectedly yesterday at the summit. But few thought the idea of a meeting between Donald Trump and Hassan Rouhani was on the cards. Yet this morning, the Iranian president said he was prepared to meet anyone in the interests of his country. And this afternoon, President Macron said he hoped in the next few weeks that both men could meet.
If he agreed to a meeting with President Trump, that my conviction was that an agreement can be met. We know the terms, we know the objectives, but we have to just now sit around the table and make that happen.
President Trump said such a meeting was realistic, and he revealed that talks were already underway, potentially to provide Iran with credit from various countries to keep its economy afloat in the face of damaging US sanctions. He said he had a good feeling that the Iranian leader wanted to meet because his economy was hurting badly.
If the circumstances were correct or the right, I would certainly agree to that. But in the meantime, they have to be good players. You understand what that means. And they can't do what they were saying they're going to do, because if they do that, they're going to be met with really very violent force. We have no choice.
If this historic meeting takes place, then it could potentially diffuse some of the tensions in the region, prompted by the US decision to withdraw from the deal, curbing Iran's nuclear program, and by Iran's decision to breach some terms of the deal. In recent months, Iran has also attacked and seized international shipping in the Gulf. It'll probably take more than one meeting to resolve a standoff that has deep roots and has divided the West. But for now, at least, some of the rhetoric has been toned down, and both sides appear ready to talk.
James Landale reporting. Indonesia is draining the swamp, a steamy jungle-clad island best known for orangutans, pygmy elephants and oil fields, is to become the site of the country's new capital in an ambitious plan to ease pressure on smog-choked Jakarta. The Indonesian President Joko Widodo says officials have chosen an area on the island of Borneo for the new capital. Construction on the vast site will start next year and residents would begin to arrive in 2024. CNN's Linda Kincaid has the details.
Jakarta is sinking. Scientists say the sprawling capital of Indonesia, which is home to more than 10 million people, is dropping below sea levels at alarming rates. The government of Indonesia announced Monday that it now wants to move its capital from Jakarta to the island of Borneo. Indonesian President Joko Widodo says the new capital, which is yet to be named, will be in a safer, more centralised place.
Risiko bencana minimal. The place has minimum risk of natural disasters, such as floods, earthquakes, tsunami, forest fire, volcanoes, and landslides. Secondly, the location is strategic as it's located in the center of Indonesia.
But critics are concerned that building a new city in Borneo will destroy more of the island's forests, which are home to orangutans and other wildlife already under threat by the palm oil industry. Some residents say Indonesia should concentrate on fixing the problems in Jakarta, where residents are struggling to cope with pollution, traffic and frequent flooding.
In the past, it was not like this. It was nicer and the seawater was good. The beach sand was nice and we could still play in the water. We now can't do it anymore. The water is murky, dirty. Every high tide, it's flooded.
Reports say North Jakarta could be 90% submerged in the next 30 years. It's already built on swampy ground, with water now spilling over from the Java Sea and the city's 13 rivers. Although water is everywhere, it's not fit to drink. People must rely on underground aquifers, which will weaken the city's foundation, making it easier for the city to slip into the sea.
Now, why has the water level become higher than my home and I am now below water level? Maybe because the seawater is eating up the soil little by little? That's what I know.
Indonesia's president says Jakarta will continue to be the country's financial capital, but it's unclear how he plans to stop the city's decline, with another city ready to rise as soon as Parliament gives its approval.
Linda Kincaid reporting there. After a 10-year-long battle, a collection of taonga left on board Captain Cook's ship, the Endeavour, will be returned on loan to the Tairawhiti region after 250 years. The taonga, which includes paddles, weapons and clothing, have been stored at museums in England and Germany. And as Tianua Hurihanganui reports, it wasn't easy getting them back.
37 taonga, which once belonged to the people of Turanganui-a-Kiwa and Te Aitonga-a-Hauiti, have been stored at 5 different museums on the other side of the world for 250 years. In October, they'll return on loan to the Tairawhiti Museum in Gisborne for the year-long Tu Te Whaihanga exhibition.
When we return them home to our Turanganui-a-Kiwa soil, it's a time for us to remember. It's a time for us to be able to grieve for our tipuna and our taonga that we've taken at the time of the first encounter. It's also a time for us to analyse and study the taonga.
Huia Pihema is the chairperson for Hei Kanohiora, an iwi governance group which has negotiated with overseas museums to have the taonga returned for the last 10 years. She says the process wasn't easy.
It's very difficult to get taonga Māori to return home. The word repatriation is almost a swear word for a lot of those types of institutes. So did we ever think that we would be able to have the return of some of these taonga that were taken from the first encounter? No, we didn't. We had our fingers crossed until probably about 3 months ago when it was confirmed that we've got to all go.
The collection will also include belts, cloaks, carvings and adornments. But the Tairawhiti Museum Director, Eloise Wallace, says she's particularly excited to see the return of 8 hoi.
One of the highlights for me will be to see 8 of the puwhaiwhai painted hoi or paddles, which were actually gifted and traded off Whareongaonga on the 12th of October 1769. So it's going to be really exciting to reflect back on the legacy and the artistry of those taonga.
It's the first time Te Tairawhiti has ever received a loan for taonga from an overseas institution. Ms Wallace says it will allow New Zealanders to go back in time.
It's been 250 years and they take us back to a world before Cook, before Europeans were even thought of. It makes me think about how amazing the society that lived here in the Tairawhiti district was. They're real evidence and insight of life 250, 300 years ago.
The exhibition will begin just in time for the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's arrival in Aotearoa. A fleet of waka and a replica of the Endeavour will voyage around New Zealand, starting in Gisborne, to mark the occasion. Ms Pihema says the exhibition will allow her people to tell their version of events when Cook arrived on their shores.
What's really big for us is probably looking to refresh a more balanced view, encouraging our whānau to be able to share the stories of actually what took place from mana whenua point of view. If you would consider that somebody might rock up to your whare, they didn't understand what you were doing in terms of greeting them, and so they turned around and shot you. It's like, what would you do about it, you know? So Tu Te Whaihanga is a really positive way to be able to help make that happen.
The Tairāwhiti Museum and local iwi are continuing to build relationships with overseas museums to have their taonga returned for longer periods of time. Ms Pehema says the ultimate goal is to have them returned for good. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
Let's return to our story about political donations and whether we should ban all political donations from foreign companies or individuals. Peter's been in contact to say no law was broken and millions of dollars have gone into buying New Zealand racehorses by Mr Ling. He's referencing the $150,000 that National got in 2016 from a New Zealand company that is owned by a Chinese businessman. But a lot of people disagree with Peter. Only companies owned by resident New Zealand citizens should be allowed to make party political donations, says this person. Another has got in touch to say if there is concern about foreign donations and potential undue influence on our political processes and democracy, what about union donations to the Labour Party, they say. Christina's got in touch to say, of course the company who donated the $150K would expect something in return. And also Julia says, definitely outside the spirit of anything, in my opinion, not comfortable with any amount of money that large, she says. Don't want to be like America.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Crown lawyer in the Mark Lundy appeal has told the Supreme Court the prosecution case didn't rely on a piece of evidence that was later ruled inadmissible. Lundy's lawyer says the mRNA evidence was crucial in convincing the jury that Lundy's shirt had his wife's brain tissue on it. But the Crown's lawyer, Philip Morgan QC, told the court the case was rock solid even after the mRNA was ruled out. The Supreme Court hearing continues tomorrow. Māori suicide prevention workers are calling for more support to help stem the alarming rise in rates of Māori suicide. New figures show Māori suicide has reached a record high, with a jump from 142 deaths to 169 in the year to June. Our Māori News correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
Stormy Rogan works for Kia Piki Te Ora Suicide Prevention in Whanganui and says her heart sank when she heard that Māori suicide rates had risen yet again. She says there are not enough counsellors and not enough funding for Māori organisations trying to help people. Mrs Rogan says they are working closely with the DHB and other providers, but wānau are struggling and everyone needs to step up. She says wānau need to spend more time together and speak more openly with one another about their feelings. The government is putting $40 million towards suicide prevention and says it will release a new strategy soon. Ko Lee Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
The Justice Minister Andrew Little says this country is at risk of falling prey to foreign influence via party donations. 3 years ago, National received a donation of $150,000 from a New Zealand company owned by a Chinese billionaire, but the party says it's above board. Electoral law does not allow foreign donations above $1,500, but companies registered in New Zealand are considered local even if they're foreign owned. Andrew Little says there is a problem with how foreign donations can be concealed, and the current regime makes it easy for donations to be channelled to parties. He's asked the Justice Select Committee to look into the foreign donation process. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says retiring MP and former Minister Claire Curran was not encouraged to leave Parliament. She has been Labour's MP for Dunedin South since 2008 and will continue to represent her constituents until she retires at next year's election. Ms Curran resigned as Broadcasting Minister after 2 failures to disclose meetings, one with RNZ's then Head of News Carol Hirschfeld and the other with tech entrepreneur Derek Handley. Mr Robertson says she decided for herself that it was time to go.
Claire's made that decision on her own. She's a good friend of mine and someone who I'm really going to miss from around this place after next year. She's made some really important contributions to us as a party and certainly to her people she represents in South Dunedin.
Grant Robertson. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says there was no pressure on Ms Curran to stay or go. The Australian academic and political commentator Yang Henjun, who was born in China, has been formally arrested there for spying. The charge comes more than 7 months of detention in China after the Sydney-based academic was arrested while he was on holiday in the country. The ABC's Bill Birtles reports.
Australia's Foreign Minister Marise Payne confirmed that Chinese authorities have formally arrested Yang Hongjun for allegedly committing espionage crimes. A Beijing-based lawyer for Mr Yang says charges may still be some time off, but this latest move is a step towards them. 54-year-old Yang Hongjun once worked for China's government, then migrated to Australia and became a prominent online writer and intellectual. He was seen for a time to be a critic of China's government, but in more recent years toned it down. His Chinese wife has been granted Australian permanent residency, but has been barred from leaving China. The maximum sentence for espionage is the death penalty.
Bill Birtles in Beijing. A Wellington body corporate representative wants the government to intervene in the insurance industry to stop premiums skyrocketing. Wellington's mayor has hosted the first of 3 meetings to give feedback to the government about the effects of disaster insurance price hikes on the city. Wendy Booth, who represents body corporates at the meeting, says the government needs to start heavily regulating the insurance industry.
Because we don't think there's enough competition in the market. There are 4 major players that have got 85% of the New Zealand market. So we don't have a lot of options in terms of who we go to for insurance.
Wendy Booth. More insurance task force meetings are scheduled for September and October. It's 5 minutes past 6. The All Blacks centre Ryan Crotty will make a much anticipated return to rugby this weekend. 9 weeks ago, Crotty fractured his thumb in the Super Rugby semi-final against the Hurricanes, but will return for Canterbury in this weekend's match against Southland. His return is also likely to cement his place in the All Blacks World Cup squad, which is named tomorrow. It was 5-time US Open tennis champion Roger Federer who was made to look like the novice early on in his opening match on this year's tournament rather than his opponent, India's Sumit Nagal, who was making just his first Grand Slam appearance. World number 190, Nagal took the first set 6-4, but the Swiss great turned things around to take the next 3, 6-1, 6-2, 6-4.
It was a tough first set for me. I was missing a lot of balls and I was trying to cut back on the unforced errors and hopefully serve a bit better because that also let me down, but it all came back just in time and at the end I played actually good tennis, so I'm happy.
Serena Williams has trounced to old foe Marina Sharapova in straight sets in their round match at the US Tennis Open, getting her quest for a record-tying 24th Grand Slam title off to a flying start. Retirement-bound Cronulla National Rugby League captain Paul Gallen has revealed he was offered double his pay to leave the Sharks for Newcastle last season. Preparing for his final home NRL match on Sunday after 19 seasons as a one-club player, 38-year-old Gallen says he was also very, very close to leaving for Manly twice in 2007 and 2010. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Melanie Laville-Moore on the search for a live-in dream merchant in Devonport. With a bit of help from the Michael King Writers Centre, we have a window on the world of Ugandan peace negotiator Betty Begombe. And this week's after-dinner speaker is our soil scientist Louis Schipper, who wants to talk about carbon again, ensuring what goes out of the soil is balanced by what goes in. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northern and western areas from Northland to Taranaki and Taihape, including Bay of Plenty. Long fine spells and a few showers. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, isolated showers tonight, fine tomorrow. Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua and Kapiti, mostly fine tonight. Cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine in most places, but showers and norwesterly gales on Stewart Island. Bulla and Westland, fine spells and isolated showers tonight. Cloud increasing tomorrow, showers becoming more extensive. Fiordland, showers, turning to rain tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. If you're just tuning in now, don't forget you can watch us live on Facebook and also Sky Channel 83. The Green Party's raising questions about whether anything was promised in exchange for the $150,000 given to the National Party by a Chinese-owned company. And it says it's yet another reason to ban political donations from foreigners. In 2016, the National Party got the money from the Inner Mongolia rider horse industry, which is a New Zealand-registered company owned by Chinese billionaire Lang Lin. At the time, National's Todd McClay Mackay did meet Mr Lang in his capacity as Trade Minister, but he denies there were any inappropriate discussions about donations at those official meetings. He says in his capacity as a national MP, he had another meeting with Mr Lang, and that's when the financial support was offered, and he says the subsequent donation was legal. Green Party Justice spokesperson Golriz Ghahraman has a members' bill that would ban all foreign donations and cap political donations at $35,000. She says the system lacks transparency.
We find it deeply concerning to hear that a previous minister has travelled, courted foreign big money corporate donations that have in fact then been received by one of our big political parties, putting foreign really big money that ordinary New Zealanders don't have access to, into a political system that should be equal and transparent and accessible to us all.
But hasn't the donation been transparent? It's been declared, it's there in black and white. People can see where it came from and how much it was for. So what's not transparent about that?
It has been. In this case, it has been. There's been previous occasions. Obviously, there's an SFO investigation into another big donation. The problem is our system doesn't require the kind of transparency that we actually want. So it's kind of a series of these stories have now come out over the past year or so where we've actually really realised that we're vulnerable not only to interference by foreign corporates and individuals, but also just by big money. And in some cases we don't know. What's not transparent about this particular donation is we don't know what was promised. This is exactly why we need to get big money out of our political system, because our politicians shouldn't be beholden to the interests of big money.
So what evidence do you have that anything was promised in exchange for this money?
Well, we just don't know. We don't know. And we know that ordinary New Zealanders can't afford to donate this kind of money. So we don't know what interests are at stake. We know overseas that big oil donates to political parties, which is what's made it really hard to see action on climate change. We know tobacco donations happen. We know that the gun lobby has gotten involved and hindered the kind of gun reforms that would keep Americans safe. And we just saw the same thing happen so easily in our political system. So we would hate for that to be compromised in New Zealand.
So in essence, you're concerned about political interference, yet you don't have any proof of political interference when it comes to this donation.
Well, New Zealanders shouldn't have to wait and investigate and find proof. The point is that our political system should be fair and equal. It should be accessible to us all equally. So one vote per person. We don't have these kinds of donations that are so outlandish that that we then have to wonder whether our politicians would be beholden to big money, would be changing their policies, changing the way that they do politics in order to appease and court big donations.
So do you think $150,000 buys you what with the National Party? Because that's what you're inferring, that something's been purchased with this money.
Well, we absolutely have no idea. The point is our politicians shouldn't have to think about how they're going to get this kind of money into their political parties, which is why my members' bill would cap any individual donation to $35,000, whether it's to a political party or to a candidate. We would lower the threshold of anonymity to $1,000. At the moment it's $15,000, which actually makes it easier to divide up big donations as well if you wanted to kind of get under the threshold. It's something that we need to do because we know globally that this kind of thing is on the rise and it's actually really damaging to democracy.
Have the Greens ever taken a donation from a foreign-owned company, regardless of the size of that donation? Have you taken any money from foreign-owned companies?
I don't have access to that information, but I don't think so. I don't think we have, but I don't have all of our historic donation records in front of me.
Right. So in terms of this particular donation, you've raised the issue that as a minister, Mr Macleay met with the individual that later the company he's involved with makes this donation. So he has said in a statement that MFAT representatives were present at the meetings, the official meetings he had with Langland. Have any of those officials who were present at the meeting told you that there were any untoward discussions about political donations?
No, and the issue remains at allegation point, which is exactly what we're calling it, but it actually really highlights the need for better controls, better transparency, better limits to our political donations regime. It's just sort of emblematic of what can happen within the law currently. And, he said, this was declared and it was legal. We don't think that it should actually be up to political parties to kind of decide who they take money from and how much, because this is about democracy, and we need to regulate that so that all New Zealanders have the same access to their democracy.
Is it about that, or is it about stemming the flow of cash to parties other than your own?
We have donations like any other political party does. We actually have an ethics committee that tells us whether the source of the donation is ethical to green kaupapa. It shouldn't be up to us, though. This is about bringing New Zealand's democracy to a place where it is accessible to all New Zealanders. It shouldn't be up to individual political parties to decide where this amount of money comes from. It really has the potential to not only undermine democracy, to skew it. And, like I say, in terms of the Greens, we are worried that big oil can have an influence on whether a government takes action on climate change, for example.
So, to be clear, has Mr McClay done anything wrong here that you are aware of?
I think there's an allegation there, but I can't verify the allegation. Obviously, if a minister uses his position to court donations for his political party on his ministerial trip, that would be a problem, but there isn't. Again, I can't verify that. That's the allegation that I can't verify.
Do you have any proof that he has used his position as a minister?
No, that's why I'm calling it an allegation. The point is, this is a huge amount of money and it can come into our political system, and we need to stop that.
So very briefly before you go, the main thing that you want done then to solve what you see as a big problem?
Well, what I would love is if the government adopted the measures that I've proposed in my members' bill, so to cap political donations at $35,000, to make it far more transparent, leaving out anonymity for donations over $1,000, and banning all foreign donations.
So do you think that, there is a problem that you are purchasing democracy with $150,000, but you're not with $35,000?
We have to have limits, and it is just unacceptable that we don't. 35 brings it to a reasonable limit in our eyes, but it's about getting the really big, huge amounts of money out. And it's about banning foreign donations, and it's about making the regime transparent. New Zealanders need to know where the money comes from as well, so that's another big issue.
When you talk about foreign donations, you obviously classify this donation that's currently under discussion in that realm, but the company is registered in New Zealand. It's got skin in the game in terms of the economy and its business interests.
I know that it isn't a foreign donation in terms of you are able to bring a donation from a foreign-owned company under New Zealand law through a company that's registered here that's affiliated with it. That's true. The problem is this whole situation. It's icky. It's not what New Zealanders want in their political system. You don't go overseas and talk to multi-billionaires who own companies in New Zealand who can then donate through that regime these sums of money. That's why the suite needs to be implemented together. The limits need to be in place, the transparency needs to be in place, and a ban on foreign donations, which will make it far clearer that we don't actually want foreign interference in our democracy.
And that's Green MP Golriz Ghahraman. As you can imagine, we were really keen to talk to National about this issue. In fact, we requested an interview with Todd McClay. He declined to comment further on the matter. And a request to the National Party leader, Simon Bridges, remains unanswered. You, however, have had quite a bit to say on this, so let's get to some more of your feedback here. Angela says, the United States has the best democracy that money can buy. We don't want that in New Zealand. These large donations need careful scrutiny, says Angela. Grant says, no, definitely no foreign donations. Paul has been in touch to say, I find it hard to believe that any foreign interest would donate to one of our political parties for any other purpose than to buy influence for its own advantage. I would only rethink that if equal donations were made to each party. So no foreign donations, please, says Paul. And Richard says, what would motivate political donations from overseas except to influence for private gain? There is no place for foreign donations to political parties at all. Zip. Even business contributions within New Zealand should be tightly limited, says Richard. The same a motivation applies here, he says. And David has responded on our Facebook live stream saying that foreign donations to our political parties, he says the law needs to change to expand the definition of foreign-owned companies, i.e. to include New Zealand registered companies with substantial foreign resident shareholders, which is, well, the example that we're considering here with the National Party. However, there is one different opinion here that says, does the foreign-owned company pay tax in New Zealand? If so, why shouldn't they donate? Keep your feedback coming. We're on 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. South Auckland leaders want the government to step in and help after a spate of violence in their community this year. There have been 4 fatal shootings in the area since March and a fatal assault in Otahuhu on Saturday night. A man was also taken to hospital after being shot at a bar in Manukau. Tom Furley reports.
Since March, there have been 4 people shot dead and more than half a dozen other shootings in South Auckland. The manager of the Otara and Papatoetoe town centres, Rhino Judge, says violence seems to be increasing.
It's not one or two incidents. It is becoming like every weekly sort of incident, and the majority of them are related to the guns.
He says it's become so common some have become desensitised to it, but many are afraid.
Publicly, it's like very sort of like unsafe to be in a public place, and anything can be happen anywhere, which is as a normal citizen, it is a concern to everybody. And honestly speaking, it is scary.
Rana Judge was among hundreds in the community who turned out to a hui in May to discuss the spate of violence in the area. At the time, Mayor Phil Goff said the solution was to crack down on guns and drugs, with more police and work with the government. The district's police commander told the community police were prioritising gang and gun violence, but urged them to help keep police informed, particularly about those with firearms. Al Filipaina, who represents the Manukau ward on the Auckland Council, says some things have changed since then, including more local government meetings with police. However, there needs to be more action now with government involved.
It's just getting to a situation where we actually sit around the table and that's all of us around what happens, what can we do, whether it's a task force that needs to be set up, but with the spate of violence and firearms use, I think the time is now and not let's wait another 3, 4, 5 months.
He says previous funding for youth workers had been particularly effective, but that has dropped off. Community leader and neighbourhood support coordinator for Manurewa, Colleen Brown, says the community has a lot of skills and groups wanting to help.
There's a massive heart here in the south, and that needs to be celebrated and supported. So if organisations could be given some kind of government funding to do the things that we know we can do well and support particularly our young people, then that is a step in the right direction.
She says the issues need a long-term strategy to build trust in the community and bring in those people who are disconnected from society.
Their life is often restricted to 5 streets. Where they live, where their mates live, where the dairy is, where the church is and where the school is. A lot of their experiences are around those streets. And until we get into the streets and understand how those streets work, the heartbeat of those streets, we're not going to actually resolve it. So it's not about big agencies coming in. It is about the community growing its own strength and resilience.
The MP for Manukau East, Jenny Salisa, says a number of people have requested a reintroduction of youth workers to deal with the issues. She says violence in the community is a complex issue without a single solution, but she's working with other ministers on how the government can respond and support the situation. The police say while it is concerning, they have been making arrests in all the cases and recovered weapons used in each of the homicides. However, they say police can't do it on their own and there needs to be a whole community approach to organised crime, firearms, violence and family harm. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
A Fiji opposition MP says he's been vindicated by the release of a video of his alleged assault by the Prime Minister. Footage emerged on Friday of Frank Bainimarama grabbing and shoving Pio Kiwadwandwa outside Parliament earlier this month. Mackenzie Smith reports.
The video, which was released by a Facebook page critical of the government, shows Frank Bainimarama marching over to Pio Tikontuandua. The Prime Minister then grabs the National Federation Party member by the lapel of his jacket and gives him a light shove. Since Mr. Tikontuandua claimed in Parliament on August 9 that he was assaulted that day, the government has denied any wrongdoing. The governing Fiji First Party called it a blatant lie, and Mr. Bainimarama insisted he only spoke sternly with the opposition MP. But Mr. Tikontuandua says the video proves his critics wrong.
Now that the video has come out, I think it's told exactly the same story that I've said from day one, including my statement to the police. So I think in a way it has, sort of cleared me,
Since Mr. Tikontuandua lodged a police complaint, an investigation has been launched and the parliamentary speaker is reviewing CCTV footage of the incident. The opposition MP wouldn't be drawn on what action should be taken.
I hope that the police will do their work, will do their job, the requirement under the law, given the complaint that I had already lodged with him.
Lawyer and government critic Aman Ravindra Singh says that will never happen. He says the Prime Minister should be charged with assault and intimidation.
If the shoe was on the other foot and the other bloke had done the same to the Prime Minister, pushed him and shoved him and swore at him and threatened him and all that, this guy would still be in jail right now. He would have been picked up, processed, charged.
Police, the parliamentary speaker and the Prime Minister's office haven't responded to requests for comment. A police spokesperson told the Fiji Times only the police commissioner, Sitiveni Ngiliho, could answer questions and he was overseas. Their silence has riled some, including Fijian human rights advocate Roshika Dio. She says in Fiji there's a culture of leaders having effective criminal immunity.
Many coup perpetrators, for instance, have evaded all forms of accountability and justice, and this has trickled down into many other facets. So this includes cases involving criminal intimidation, assault and so forth.
But experts say the release of the video will make it harder for the government to avoid taking action. For example, it appears to contradict Mr. Bainimarama's claim that Mr. Tikontuandua broke his own glasses. The footage shows his glasses falling out of his pocket and onto the concrete moments after the Prime Minister grabbed him. During the incident, about 6 security guards looked on but made no attempt to intervene. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
And in the last hour, Fiji's police commissioner has published a statement on Mr. Bainimarama's alleged assault. He says the investigation is ongoing and once completed, he will send a report to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, Fiji's law provides for a 1-year jail term for those found guilty of common assault. The Constitution deems people convicted of such a crime ineligible to run for Parliament. To US politics now, and the race for the Democratic presidential nomination was heading towards what looked to be an almost certain victory for the former Vice President Joe Biden. But things have taken an interesting turn in the past week. Both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have been pulling big crowds on the campaign trail, and one new poll puts Biden, Warren and Sanders in a 3-way tie. Here's CNN's political editor Jeff Zeleny.
We're not going to win this by just saying not Trump. We're not.
Elizabeth Warren sharpening her electability argument and delivering the message to some of the largest crowds yet of the 2020 campaign. In Seattle on Sunday and last week in St. Paul, Minnesota, Warren drawing thousands and thousands in a sign of rising enthusiasm and growing curiosity about her candidacy.
And that's what I'm seeing in these crowds, people who are all in.
It's a subtle, though unmistakable contrast with Joe Biden, whose audiences have been far smaller. Yet Biden's still leading the Democratic field by most metrics, as he insists he's the strongest candidate to defeat President Trump. He's not calling for a revolution, but rather hoping to make the race a referendum on Trump.
It's going to take a movement. It has to be a movement grounded in our values and our ideals that define us as a country. And they're being crushed.
The 2020 contest has been remarkably stable throughout the summer, but campaign advisors tell CNN they believe the race could be far more fluid heading into the fall. A new Monmouth University poll today shows a 3-way fight, with Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Biden at the top of the field. Yet that survey stands in contrast to a CNN poll last week that showed Biden with a double-digit lead over Sanders and Warren. Sanders is also drawing impressive crowds, just like he did in 2016. A reminder that crowd sizes do not always translate to victory. But then, like now, the fight for the nomination is framed about whether a progressive or more moderate approach offers the best chance of winning back the White House.
CNN's Jeff Zeleny with that report. 7 eggs from the world's last 2 remaining northern white rhinos have been successfully fertilised artificially, raising hopes of saving the endangered animals. Serena Chowdhury reports.
Scientists have successfully artificially fertilised 7 eggs from the world's last 2 remaining northern white rhinos, reviving hopes of saving the endangered animals. 45-year-old Sudan, who died last year in Kenya, was the last male northern white rhinoceros on the planet. Only 2 female members of the species remain at the Old Pajeta Conservancy about 155 miles north of Nairobi. A team led by scientists from Berlin said 7 out of 10 eggs harvested from these rhinos had successfully matured and been artificially inseminated on Sunday. The sperm used in the process had been previously taken from 2 bulls of the same species and kept frozen. It's hoped they will become viable embryos that can be frozen and later transferred to southern white rhino surrogate mothers. Kenya had around 20,000 rhinos in the 1970s, but rampant poaching severely reduced numbers. There are an estimated 650 rhinos in the country today, almost all of which are black.
That was Serena Chowdhury reporting. Now let's quickly whip through some of your feedback on MPs' salaries. This person says, sure, they might work hard, but is that insinuating the rest of us don't? Another person says, to tell the truth, their actual hourly rate is probably quite low. They work pretty long hours, many evenings and weekends. They are probably paid a pittance compared to many CEOs. That one is from Winnie, curious. And someone else says, was the time when backbenchers earned the same as uni lecturers. Now they get double and their increases are treble those that the education sector is striking over. We work hard too. Thank you so much for all your feedback and for tuning in. Don't forget, you can check out some of our picture stories online.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Māori suicide prevention workers want more support to help stem a dramatic rise in rates of Māori suicide. In the wake of news of a big Chinese-related donation to the National Party, the Justice Minister Andrew Little says this country is at risk of falling prey to foreign influence through donations. A Wellington apartment owner facing skyrocketing disaster insurance premiums says the increases are not sustainable and will end up gutting the downtown. And Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam has again expressed concern over what she calls an escalation of violence in recent protests in the territory.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
There's always a constellation of risk factors that contribute to a person feeling hopeless and wanting to end their life.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
Parents maybe don't need to be too free